Thanks so much, Mark. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the original owners of this beautiful land that I have missed so much that we're on. I'd also like to let you know that I have got a background paper if anyone is interested in following up what I've got to say today. My background was, I was at Murdoch University in Western Australia and looking for a topic for my PhD, and luckily I came across a pair of supervisors, one in psychology and the other in law. And they said, oh, look, one of the topics that we've come across that we think is pretty interesting and would be good for a PhD is the issue of consent to sex by people with intellectual disability. And I thought, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. So that's how I started in this field, and I've been doing this for about, longer than I care to mention really, but quite a few years now. Okay. Okay, so we've already talked about this morning the UN declarations. Now, the one that I would like to bring your attention to is the one that's about the rights of people with mental retardation. Sorry about the politically incorrect language, but this was drafted back in 1971. The thing that I'd like to draw your attention to is the fact that it's got a phrase, to the maximum degree of feasibility. So what does that actually boil down to in practice? As Mark already mentioned, this tends to be left up to the carers, the professionals, the parents. And in many cases, parents are very reluctant to talk about sex with their sons and daughters, and so are professionals. I'll try to stick slightly to my paper here, because I tend to rave on a bit, as you probably already have worked out. Okay. People tend to neglect this issue of sex education. They tend to not even, obviously in many cases, not even talk about or touch upon the issue of intimate relationships. Sex education that is given is very often the mechanics of sex. This is how it happens, and that's it. So people tend to be lacking in the social skills that they need to be able to form relationships, to be able to conduct them in a way that makes them happy, to be able to break relationships. So pretty much we've got this culture of sweeping this issue of sexuality under the carpet. Okay. One of the reasons that parents and professionals put forward for this attitude is that they want to protect the person. Well, that's all well and good. Sure, we all want to protect people. But by the same token, they do have a right to sexual expression. They do have a right to be sexual people, to express their sexuality in a way that makes them happy, not necessarily other people. Okay. Many people think that if sex isn't mentioned, then there's those in their care won't actually even be aware of it. This isn't true. Even if people aren't given sex education, and certainly not if they're not given any information about intimacy, intimate relationships, building a caring and loving relationship with another person if that's what they want, that this will just go away and the person won't be aware of it. But this, of course, is not true. In our society, people are aware of sex, even if it's not explicitly mentioned. It's all around us. There's quite a lot of evidence that people who are very ignorant in terms of having received any formal education about sex are still very aware of it. How can they not be, you know? Okay. So the problem that I see with this attitude is that ignorance actually leads to increased, not decreased, vulnerability. If you don't know anything, how can you protect yourself? Okay, for example, some of the things that I've come across in my research, I've got a quote there that the taxi driver touched me sexually and I didn't know if I could say no or not. What sort of a situation is that where someone is in that position? The caravan, there was a situation, an institution, in the grounds of this institution there was this derelict caravan, and this was where the residents went to have sex. Now, when a researcher actually went and had a look at this, there were feces, human feces on the floor. There was a stained and torn mattress, which is where the acts took place. it was infested by vermin. Would anybody here in this room even think about having an intimate relationship or performing a sexual act in that situation? Absolutely not. And yet this is what was actually happening at this institution. When this was brought to the attention of authorities at the institution, guess what they did? They towed the caravan away. That's it. Nothing was done about the issue of providing a place for people to have sex in decent, hygienic conditions. Okay, I'd like to bring a couple of cases to your attention. These have come before the courts. The first one is RV Eastwood. This took place in Victoria. The complainant had an IQ of 36. This was a female. She was actually aged 35 years old and the IQ 36. Now what happened was that she was working at a factory, and men who also worked at the same factory somehow arranged with her to meet them or to pick her up and take her to a motel suite in Traralgon, Victoria. They'd engaged this suite for the purposes of watching pornography and drinking alcohol. So she went there. She actually was, when the other men arrived, she was actually in having a sexual act with Eastwood, the first person involved. So they actually witnessed this. They were together in the bedroom of this suite. After about 10 minutes they came out. They were both naked. She sat in the lounge area on a chair, and Eastwood urinated upon her in the presence of other men. Effectively, what happened was that Eastwood was taken to court and he got an effective sentence of 12 months. The second case is that of RV Gretsch, which took place in New South Wales. What happened in this situation was that the complainant, a male in his early 20s with borderline intellectual disability, he actually had an ongoing sexual relationship with Gretsch, who was a carer, a team leader at this home that Matthew lived in. He lived there for several years, and then he was moved to an apartment also run by the Department of Community Services, and where Gretsch continued to provide him with services a couple of days a week. So they had this ongoing relationship over a period, well, they actually knew each other for a period of 5 years, and the sexual relationship commenced after they'd known each other for about 12 months. That then kept going, and Gretsch's marriage actually broke up on account of this relationship. The way that this case came to the attention of the courts was that Matthew's parents became aware of the relationship, and they objected very strongly to it, and it became a court matter. When they appeared before the court, they both expressed their love for each other, and they both expressed the wish to continue having this relationship with each other. So the reason that Gretsch was prosecuted was that he was a carer and Matthew was in his care, and he had an effective sentence of 5 years. Now, comparing those two cases, I don't know about you, but it seems to me as though 12 months for the first case and 5 years for the second one seems a little inequitable. I know it's in accordance with the law, but it seems to me that the law in this case is perhaps wrong. Okay, current Queensland law, as Mark already mentioned, I was starting to think, Mark, you just present my paper, and because you're saying all the things I'm going to be saying here. Okay, so as Mark mentioned, if anyone has a sexual relationship with someone with intellectual disability in the state of Queensland, they're liable to 14 years imprisonment. Now, that changes if you're a carer or in a position of authority over a person with intellectual disability. We're actually liable to life imprisonment. Okay. So there we go. That's a life imprisonment. I've got myself a little bit ahead. Okay. So what is the effect of current Queensland law? Well, in theory, people are condemned to a life of celibacy. So is this something that anybody thinks is a really good thing? Personally, I don't think probably most people in this room would think so. In practice, of course, what really happens is that people do have sex, but they have it in illicit ways, in secret liaisons, in hole-in-the-corner type situations. So this is obviously, to my mind, a very inequitable law. It's not only inequitable, but it's discriminatory because it applies only to a subsection of the population. And also, I would argue that it's inconsistent with the UN Declaration, which says that people have the right to the same rights as other people to the maximum degree of feasibility. Well, if it's not feasible for people with intellectual disability to have sex, then I would say we're not trying very hard. Okay. I've compared current Queensland law to a policy of zero tolerance. What this means is that if an act takes place, then it must be punished under a zero tolerance policy. It imposes a mandatory penalty, and it takes no account of the history of the particular situation, of the particular circumstances surrounding each particular act. And the only way that only stage at which this is taken into account is during the sentencing process. Therefore, it's ineffective because the acts take place, people still do these things, and but because of the situation of it being illegal, therefore it takes place, as I said, in a hole-in-the-corner manner, in illicit situations. Harm minimisation policies, on the other hand, tend to acknowledge that people are going to have sex. Let's look at it pragmatically, and let's look at what we can do to minimise any harm that can take place. So, for example, you wouldn't have situations, or hopefully they would be minimised, of where someone urinates upon a naked woman in front of other men. So I would argue that harm minimisation is the way to go. Current Queensland law is zero tolerance, and clearly it's inequitable, it's ineffective, and it's discriminatory. Okay. The other issue, this is an issue that I've identified, and I haven't actually seen it in the literature, and I haven't seen it discussed in legal cases, is the issue of authority. If you're a person with intellectual disability, who do you perceive as being in authority over you? Well, pretty much anyone, I would argue. There's a situation that I know of, once again, took place in an institution. Now, within the, probably you already know that within the intellectually disabled community, those who are more able tend to occupy a higher social status or a higher position in the hierarchy than do those who are more disabled. So what happened was that a couple were discovered on a stairwell. The man was one of the more able people that resided at this institution. He was moderately streetwise, well, comparatively streetwise. The woman was quite impaired, and when they were discovered, the woman was naked, and he was observed taking her underwear and stuffing it behind a drain pipe. When they investigated, they actually found 23 pairs of women's underwear behind the drain pipe. So I would argue that in this situation, the man was perceived by this woman as being in a position of authority over her. He told her, take off your underwear, so she complied. He was higher in the social status in the hierarchy than she was, so therefore she did what she was told. Okay. The other thing is obviously that protection, or what parents and professionals who oppose sexual knowledge amongst the population with intellectual impairment, they argue, as I've said before, that the law is there to protect people. But this is clearly not working. We've heard yesterday, for example, from Leanne, from many of the other speakers, about the fact that people with intellectual disability are so offended against. As one of the speakers this morning said, 90% of women with intellectual disability have experienced sexual assault. How is this protecting anyone? It's clearly not. So this stated aim of protection is clearly not being fulfilled. And the parents and professionals who would argue, oh, but we want to protect people, well, it's not working. So I've got a few recommendations, just a few, about 10, I think. Okay. Decriminalisation. I really honestly believe that this law ought to be abolished. It should not be illegal for people with intellectual disability to have sex. It's clearly not in Victoria. There is no law against a person, a member of the general public, not in a position of authority, to have sex with people with intellectual disability. Now, the case that I mentioned before, the one of Eastwood, which did take place in Victoria, it was prosecuted and it was a successful prosecution. But this was because the woman didn't consent. She certainly didn't consent to being urinated upon, because the man came up behind her and urinated upon her back without warning. And secondly, that she didn't have capacity with an IQ of 36. She did not know or understand the act that she was involved in. So therefore, this was prosecuted as a case of rape rather than under any kind of intellectual disability type legislation. So if the person is incapable of consent and we don't have a law that's discriminatory, then it can be prosecuted under general law, under the law against rape or against sexual assault. As I think Jody yesterday pointed out, we have to anticipate what the opponents are going to say, what arguments are they going to put up. Well, there's my answer. We prosecute under general law, not under any specific discriminatory type of law. Okay, rights education. As I've mentioned before, some people don't know that they have the right to say no. They can actually refuse an act. Or if someone touches them in a way that they're not comfortable with, they can say, stop it, don't do that. And if the person refuses to stop, then they can complain. I'll get onto the complaint channels in a little while. Okay. Obviously, people need to be taught that sexual acts are different to hygienic or medical acts. This is very clearly outlined in the literature and in law, certainly in, let me think about this, a case of Morgan, which took place in Victoria in 1976. This is very clearly outlined, that it must be clearly understood that this is a sexual act rather than a medical or hygienic act. And the other thing that people need to be educated about is complaint channels. If something happens and they don't like it, so the taxi driver touched them, then they need to know who to go to tell about this, how to complain about it. People don't know this kind of information. Professionals, we need to have a policy of openness, in my opinion. Excuse me. I've talked about the fact that I think we ought to decriminalise law where it's just involving a member of the general public with a person with intellectual disability. What about in the case of professionals? Queensland Education Department has a very clear policy which applies if you have a situation where a staff member has a relationship with a student. So in that situation, it's okay. You need to be upfront about it. You need to, in confidence, report this pre-existing relationship. Now, I think that we could use a similar policy in relation to people with intellectual disability and someone in authority. As I already mentioned, I do believe that most people with intellectual disability perceive anyone who's more able than them to be in a position of authority over them. However, what about professionals? What about those who actually administer care to them? Once again, I believe that we could institute a policy where it's okay to have a relationship with someone with intellectual disability who's in your care if you report this, if you make sure, if it's ensured by authorities, that the person's capable of consent, they know what they're consenting to, and they want to do it. I don't see any reason why that couldn't work. But I mean, if you have any comments, please jump in at any time. If you think that's the worst thing you've ever heard, just please say so. Okay. The other thing we need to do is education of parents and professionals. We need to get people to examine their own attitudes towards sexuality. Here's the quote that
Can I just jump in there?
Sure.
I would, yeah.
Yeah.
I would have viewed it as a breach of the fiduciary relationship.
Sure.
That you're there to meet the needs of the person,
Sure.
not to meet your own needs.
Sure.
And that if you indeed wanted to pursue a relationship with that person, then you should step down from your position, move away from that, give it a reasonable period of time, 6 months, 12 months,
Sure.
in order to disengage from your fiduciary relationship into a personal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you wish to proceed, and the person wishes to proceed. But I would view it as counterproductive to say it's okay for staff employed in care relationships to engage sexually with consenting people who are in their care. I just think it's a clear breach of that fiduciary relationship, and I certainly wouldn't argue that I'd want legislation that upheld that. Whereas I do think it's that there are circumstances where people have fallen in love in professional relationships, so that'd be
Sure.
my comment.
Sure. That's exactly the argument that I considered in my PhD in the case of Gretsch, where he did have this ongoing relationship with someone in his care, and both men really wanted to continue the relationship, and they both said that they loved each other. Certainly I thought about the issue of resigning. However, if the person resigns, then they're actually moved away from the person. I know that's the whole point, but the person, what happens to the relationship over that period of time? I guess you could argue that, well, if it didn't survive for 6 or 12 months, then maybe it wasn't meant to be. But I also considered the fact that people who have intellectual disability probably have a very limited range of potential sexual partners. I would guess that most of the potential sexual partners would be other people who have intellectual disability. However, if there's a real relationship that's going on between someone actually falls in love with someone that they're caring for, they really genuinely care for them, I think there would be ethical ways of managing that, and that's why I've argued that I don't think that it should be condemned out of hand, and I think that moving a person right away, making them resign from their position, could be actually destructive. So therefore, yeah, I agree. There's certainly two sides to this, and that one's a really thorny issue. Okay.
Can I make a comment about
Sure.
that? I think that the issue of there being a power imbalance in terms of there being a valid consent is a really important one, and I see that in a different context with at QCAT in applications for guardianship. Oh my God, Grandma's having sex in the nursing home. Well, does Grandma want to be having sex? Because if she does, then it's really very difficult to say that she's at risk. But sometimes relatives will argue, well, you don't understand. The thing is that this man is standing over her, and he's got a higher level of competence. And so it's that balancing, of who is in control, and if somebody's exercising control, can the person with lesser control really freely and voluntarily agree?
Yep, I totally agree with that. Sorry, can I just respond to that one? Yeah. Yes, I totally agree, and that's why I've advocated that in this situation that it needs to be declared, it needs to be examined by perhaps whoever's in authority in that particular situation, whether it be by a senior member of maybe the residence, if it's within a residence that it's taking place, as happened in the case of Gretsch. And make sure that there is not this power imbalance there must be free agreement. It must be voluntary on the part of the person with intellectual disability. Now, I know that it could be very hard for them to say no, but if this was handled ethically up front, where the person was counselled, where both parties perhaps were counselled, and where it became clear that, yes, these people really care for each other and they want to have sex.
I hear what you're saying. Sorry, my name's Victoria. I work for Wild Service, and we're a sexual violence program for people being victims of sexual assault with intellectual disability. And what we see is the process of grooming and the power imbalance. So grooming is often applied to children who are victims of sexual assault and other forms of abuse, but with adults with intellectual disability, no matter what their activity, can I say, and no matter where they live, borderline, mild, high needs, whatever label you want to attach to it, they are very vulnerable for a number of reasons you outlined to abuse. And this process of grooming, which does not get talked about enough in the literature, and it just happens all the time. So that's something, to me, I hear what you're saying, but it's got to be a very competent manager, someone who really knows what they're doing, who can make that call.
Yep.
I wouldn't want to make that call that you're referring to. I mean, it was just, it's a hard one to make. So I guess that's my point.
Sure.
And what Mark said, you can't put this stuff in legislation. It's just,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So, keep going.
Sorry.
I'm going for hours.
Can I just, your comment about breaches presumes that these people are in a relationship and then you go to the authority. To my mind, as the professional involved, as the carer, that person should never have been in a relationship. It shouldn't have started where someone goes, oh yeah, we're in this relationship and this is where we're going. It should have never been allowed to get to that situation. I mean, when you talk about those two cases, the difference between that Eastwood situation where the behaviour was appalling, but you're talking about a co-worker in a factory who probably also has a very low intellectual capacity given the work they're undertaking. It's quite different from somebody who's in a position of authority and should have never entered into a sexual relationship with that person. So I do see them as being very different, and I understand the difference in terms of the penalty. And I have considerable concerns, given what we're hearing in the National Inquiry about the lack of capacity of people in authority being able to make decisions about what they consider to be appropriate sexual responses.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who do you give it to? You can't trust the Salvation Army, you can't trust the Catholic Church. I mean, it's quite clearly those people can't make decisions. Who are we going to make those decisions? Oh yeah, this was an appropriate relationship or it wasn't.
Yep. What I was saying, I guess, was that I agree with you that Gretch acted incorrectly. What I was suggesting that is if that situation were to occur again, where people did get attracted to each other, where they did get form feelings for each other, that before any sexual acts happen, that this should then, at that stage, be taken to whatever authority. As you correctly point out, yeah, well, what's the authority going to be? Yeah. Look, I know this is a very thorny issue, and I thought that I would probably get some comments on my ideas here. So thank you very much for that. But I think, yeah, very clearly, this must. The process that I'm advocating must take place before the relationship gets to a sexual stage.
But it is complex.
It certainly is. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Okay. The quote that I've got up here is actually from a parent. By the very nature of their handicap, they're always overlooked and directed. So not only do mentally handicapped people need sex education and training, but so do we, the parents and professionals, the overlookers. Our attitudes must be examined and, if necessary, undergo change if mentally handicapped people are ever going to have their sexual needs recognised and met. So that person actually said that back in 1983. So I'm not sure how much we've actually adopted that way of thinking in the meantime. Okay, so what do we actually need to teach people with intellectual disability about sexual relationships and intimate relationships? Firstly, intimacy. We don't need to just teach them about the mechanics, as I mentioned before. We need to teach them about forming relationships, about falling in love, about what it feels like, about all these sorts of things, about forming and breaking relationships. How do you actually form a relationship with somebody? Some people probably have no idea and no social skills to enable them to do that. We also need to teach them about consent. So the fact that consent needs to be freely given. It can't be coerced. It can't be due to a power imbalance. It must be because the person genuinely wants to do the act. Men and women need to be taught about women's pleasure. There's a case I know of where both partners had intellectual disability. The woman said to him, "It's hurting," and he just said, "It doesn't hurt." He couldn't comprehend that his experience was not the experience. So men in particular need to be taught about this. In contrast, women with intellectual disability tend to be quite aware of their partner's pleasure and their partner's needs and wishes. Men tend to, so apparently it might be a gender thing, so sorry about that, guys. Okay, social skills training. Now these are some recommendations made by Brown and Barrett, and to me they make quite a lot of sense. So they need to be taught about their sexual options. In other words, we need to teach about lesbian and gay and bisexuality, age-appropriate social skills. So people who are in their 20s need to be taught about the kinds of skills that they would have if they were a mainstream person of that age. They need to find acceptable ways of communicating their needs to other people. So grabbing people, trying to force themselves on other people, obviously that's not acceptable, and that needs to be taught. We need to help them to find ways of expressing their sexuality in ways that are acceptable to them and to other people. So these seem to me to be three quite relevant points.
Can I say there, and I'm sorry for taking up
No, that's fine.
airplay, but
Go for it.
It also needs to start at a very early age and in conjunction with education. I have a child who's intellectually impaired and autistic, and he's at a special school. And one of the things that the school has been particularly good about is, he and a group of his cohort, they're furious little masturbators. It's about time and place. And one of the occupational therapists said, one of the parents was upset about this, and they want the children to be redirected to another activity. Well, it's about you're in school, so that place is not appropriate. But sometimes, depending on the level of severity of the disability, it just needs to be, the child needs to be in the right spot. And being open and teaching that as part of like an individual education plan is one way of preparing people for what comes later on. Because once somebody's in care, that then becomes an issue for the care provider. And you can't just say, well, no, it's not going to happen. It's a way of facilitating it, which I think is your entire point, that it's going to happen, it should happen. How can it happen? But if it's already begun as part of an education program, you're further on the track to knowing that. I mean, I've been very grateful that that's, that somebody's open-minded enough to look at that and work with that.
Yes, thank you very much. You've exactly reinforced my point. Yes, I totally agree. Okay, here's a situation that happened a few years ago. There were a young man and woman who were attending a day learning centre, a daycare centre, and they both had learning disabilities. During lunchtimes and breaks, they were at the front kissing and fondling, and the manager decided he didn't like this very much. So he ordered that these people had to be kept apart. So you can imagine what happened, of course, that they were discovered in all kinds of situations, in storerooms, out in the garden, here, there and everywhere. They couldn't be kept apart. So the manager at that point contacted the parents and was very upset about this behaviour. But it seems to me that was a perfect opportunity for, as you're saying, to give some social skills training, to teach about what's appropriate when and where, and to help these people to explore their sexuality in a way that's acceptable both to them and to the parents and to the other people involved. Okay, so how can we meet the needs of people with intellectual disability? Certainly not by having a disapproving attitude. This is not likely to lead to anything that's going to be productive. We need to support people with their sexual needs and help them to explore what's best for them. We need to have positive attitudes to it instead of being negative and condemnatory. We need to provide privacy so that those who are interested in and want to have a sexual relationship have a place and a way of having sex in a way that's acceptable to them, so that they're not condemned to being in a dirty, disgusting old caravan out in the grounds. What about pregnancy? This is going to be, I'm sure, one of the main objections to what I'm saying. So if people with intellectual disability do get pregnant, it's not actually the end of the world. I know of a case of a woman who's IQ of 42, and she became pregnant. Now, I'm going to say something that you're probably going to think I'm very naive, but it wasn't clear how this actually happened. Now, what I actually mean by that is the woman hated being touched, so it was a little bit of a mystery as to how she actually came to conceive a child. But she was in care. It was handled in a very supportive way. She was really thrilled about the fact that she got to have new clothes as Tommy got bigger. She actually was delivered of her child by caesarean section, and that was not because she had intellectual disability, but because of a medical reason. Unfortunately, the child was adopted. It was an unimpaired child. It was adopted. Now, that certainly isn't the ideal outcome, but nor is pregnancy the end of the world for people with intellectual disability. Okay, the last thing that I would advocate is that we all need to, including people with intellectual disability, understand that yes means yes. No pressure, no coercion, no inducements. Yes means yes. So we need to have a positive consent standard. This should apply to everybody, not only with people with intellectual disability. If there's a mentally able person, I would advocate that the defendant needs to be able to show that they did actually have reasonable grounds for believing that the person was capable of consenting. And did they ask them? Did they ask them outright, do you want to do this? Do you understand what it is we're going to do? Yes? Okay, fine. The defendant should be responsible for showing that he did obtain consent. Okay, just to finish up with I'll just read my little conclusion first and then I'll give you my commercial. Okay, in conclusion, current Queensland law prohibits the sexual expression of persons with intellectual impairment. This has the effect of driving liaisons underground, so that they must be conducted in stealth and sometimes under conditions that no mainstream person would tolerate. Ignorance and repression opens the population with intellectual impairment to far more abuse and possible prosecution for socially unacceptable actions than if they possessed appropriate knowledge and social skills. Pardon me. Women's sexual experiences in particular are likely to be unsatisfactory and unfulfilling, conducted as they are quickly and under threat of discovery. Under current law, parents and professionals are obliged to act as watchdogs rather than promoters of the autonomy and rights of persons in their care. The sexual rights and needs of this population need to be brought into the spotlight rather than being swept under the carpet as they have been in the past. Only then can we address huge gaps in knowledge and experience. Only then can we end discrimination and foster sexual freedom and autonomy so as to immeasurably enhance the lives of those in our care. Thank you, and I'll just continue with my little ad. You may have noticed I don't have an institutional affiliation on my presentation. That's because I've resigned my position in Hong Kong. So if anybody's been really impressed by my presentation today and would like to offer me a job, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, hi Claire.
Hi.
Thanks for your presentation. My name's Georgina. I work with Family Planning Queensland. I suppose I just wanted to make a comment and also ask a question. In relation to, when we're talking about sexuality, relationships, intimacy, I would argue that the sex part of what we're talking about is one part of people's experience, and there's a continuum of intimacy, there's a continuum of relationships that people can have. And I think, as evidenced by the amount of, comments that were made during your presentation, we get ourselves worked up about it. And we go to this sex place before we go anywhere else. And I suppose coming back to then thinking about the criminal code in Queensland, my experience is often, I talk to workers every day who are supporting people with intellectual disability to either learn about their bodies, understand relationships, but more often what I'm talking to workers about is sexual behaviours that are concerning or problematic for the person or for others. When we then say, well, here's a whole range of different things that you could do, education, some workers will say, well, we don't have a policy. And the reason we don't have a policy is because the criminal code says that my client is not able to have sex. I suppose my question is really, and I'll get to it, is really about, there's a whole part of that picture that we miss. That actually what happens is people who are supporting people towards experiencing intimacy, they get stuck in this sex land without thinking about all these other things. So what happens is people's rights to all this other stuff is swept under the carpet. And I'm just wondering if you've got any insights or feedback around, well, what can professionals or key support people do to actually support people better?
Informing gradual progression towards...
Yeah. So how do we break that mould in terms of perception that I can't talk about this because it's illegal? Because that's often the feedback that workers have, that they have a fear, they're frozen.
It's illegal to talk about it.
Well, it's illegal to support people, to give them information because it's illegal for a person to have sex.
Understand, yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons that I'm advocating that the law should be abolished. It's ridiculous.
In absence of the law being abolished, though, because there's a whole lot of workers that exist out there and there's people engaging in sexual activity or wanting intimacy, and the law hasn't been abolished, and I don't actually think it will be for quite some time. So what do we do in the meantime?
What do you do in the meantime?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess it depends on the person themselves and how much risk they're going to be prepared to take. If they're afraid that by giving people information, surely it's not illegal to give people information.
No, it's not. I think it's a perception issue.
Yeah. So how do we change that? So what I'm thinking is, I'm sorry, perhaps I didn't stick a little bit more closely to my paper, but I didn't want to stand up here and just read you a paper. One of the things that I advocate is workshops for people who are involved with people giving care to people with intellectual disability, helping them to examine their own attitudes. Do they actually feel that, I don't want to talk about sex with my son or daughter who's got intellectual disability, and changing those attitudes so that they actually do feel more comfortable and getting them to a place where they act as though, well, their sons and daughters don't have an intellectual disability. So if they were to give the same information as they would give if the person was a mainstream person.
I'd just like to...
Not you again, you're a problem.
Just to what Georgina's saying about the relationship stuff, there's so much acquiescence that goes on and masking and issues with abstract concepts in everything people do.
Yeah.
And relationships are one of them. So understanding, like what you would call social skills, what we would talk about is that understanding of relationships and how they work.
Mm-hmm.
So we do a lot of work in that early intervention, prevention, re-traumatisation stuff around, well, what is this type of relationship? It's a big part of what we do. But what we see, and we have the same experience, people ring up saying it's illegal or whatever, or it's about confidence. How do I talk to my child about this? What kind of things should I be focusing on? How do I even explain masturbating, you know, that's a hard one. So it's about, I guess for us it's the education, what you're talking about is so important, and reducing vulnerability. So I'm really glad you've written this paper and said that. But I guess the other side of the right stuff is so important as well. People should be able to do what they like. It's more about how do you, I think the power stuff is the thing that is very hard.
Yes.
It's not black and white. And even like the criminal code's a very good example. You can't just have one statement, you know, in a piece of legislation.
Yeah.
The other thing, sorry, I thought of about half an hour ago, was case law. I wondered if you looked at case law.
Oh yes, I have.
I imagine you have. So
Yes.
yeah, because often that's something that stops that particular law being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly right. Yes, as part of my PhD, I looked at all jurisdictions in Australia, and there is no consistency, as I think it's been pointed out many times. The only state in Australia, just to give you an example of how strange the law is in this area, South Australia is the only state where you have to actually know that if you have vaginal sex that you might get pregnant. Apart from that, every other jurisdiction, you have to know what the act is, and you have to know that it's a sexual act rather than a medical or hygienic act. That's all you have to know.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for your talk.
Thanks.
My name's Carmel. I'm from the Queensland Centre for Intellectual and Developmental Disability, QCID. It's more of a comment, really. Weekly, I go out to this group called the Campbell's Club that meet. It's a group of people who live in transient situations or live in hostels with varying disabilities. And I'm a student nurse, among other things, and we go out and give health talks. And at a recent feedback session, overwhelmingly, people wanted to know about relationships and keeping them, and what is legal and what isn't illegal. One fellow had a history, I don't remember his full history, but he was so confused that he spoke to a girl and then was imprisoned, and this was in his past. So just completely not understanding what was appropriate and not appropriate. So it's lovely that you are bringing this to the attention of everyone. It's
Oh,
so
thank you very
important.
much.
It's so, so important. Beyond the sex stuff, they get that, they do that. It's, so many things. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Yay, I escaped. Thank you.
Thanks.